Hi there, welcome to No Nonsense Whiskey. My name's Vin PF, and on today's episode we're going to be covering something that I haven't covered in so long it's unreal, and that's a bourbon. There was a time a couple of years ago when I was really getting into my bourbons, and I kept saying things like I'm going off Scotch, I'm a bit bored of Scotch. That's kind of done a bit of a U-turn recently. I've been covering a lot more Scotch than I ever did, and really kind of rediscovering the genre as something I like to do on the channel. I don't focus myself down any one path, and I certainly don't say no to any particular kind of whiskey, you know, whether it be kind of non-age statements or whatnot. If it could be classed as whiskey, or even some stuff that probably could be whiskey and isn't, like, you know, non-3 years aged stuff, whatnot, you know, that sort of thing. If it's in that kind of ballpark, then I'll review it, because I'm not too worried about whether I like it or not. You know, I'll just say whether I like it or not, that kind of thing. I digress. I'm covering some bourbon today, and I actually got this recently for my birthday, so that's pretty cool. My mother got me this. Thank you very much, mummy dear. And this is the Wild Turkey Longbranch. Now, I covered a couple of wild turkeys in the past. The rare breed was a turning point for me in bourbon. It was really what got me into bourbons, because it's really, really good. But this one here is a really interesting one, because the people who own Wild Turkey, the Russells, they hired Matthew McConawho to be their kind of like creative director, and Matthew McConaughey didn't want to just sort of stand around. He wanted to kind of get involved and make a whiskey, make a bourbon, and this is what we got. We've got the Longbranch. It's an interesting one. Now, a couple of things to note about this. Obviously, the bottle looks cool. You know, I don't like to talk about things like that ordinarily, but the bottle does look cool. It's 43%, which I have to say does seem a shame. I wish it had been a little bit higher, but the price kind of fits that. This one came in at like 25 quid when it's on deal, which is kind of superb. We love that sort of thing. But yeah, it can go for about 35 quid. It's probably a little bit expensive, but as we'll get into it, probably worth it in the long run. In terms of fitting in with the range, there's obviously some cheaper ones. In this country, you've got the standard Wild Turkey, which used to be called the 81, and then they've got the 101, 101, and then, you know, the rare breed on from that, various other kind of exclusive and expensive things and whatnot. So the other thing to note about this is that it's, although it doesn't say an age statement, the original release, which was like 2018, was meant to be an 8-year-old. This one does carry the statement, the Kentucky Straight Bourbon, which means it has to be a minimum of 4 years, but we don't know the exact age. They could be playing around with that. It could be at least 4, but the original kind of press releases and whatnot said 8 years, based on my research online. That's a lot of wittering. Let's get onto the actual nosing and see if this is really worth the money, and have a look. You know, obviously this is natural coloured, because we're talking about a bourbon here. It has to be natural coloured. And I'm not entirely sure of the mash bill. We don't talk about that much on kind of Scottish reviews, because it's just malted barley. Obviously, bourbon has to be at least 51% corn. Usually it's more, and then there's usually some rye, and then a tiny bit of malted barley in at the end, just to get that fermentation going. Let's get onto the nose and see what we've got. Now, as somebody who I like bourbon, but I've been off bourbon for a long time, it's quite sweet on the nose for me, actually, which is interesting to get back to. You can see I've enjoyed this a lot. You know, the bottle doesn't lie. You know, it's gone down quite a lot while I've been kind of reviewing this, but yeah, quite sweet. It's got a really nice corn elements to it, which I really love in bourbon. Those sweet honeys, and for me, it's kind of cinnamony, maybe a bit of nutmeg. These are always quite spicy on the nose. Let's try on the palate and see what we've got. Now, the cool thing about bourbons, again, is that they have to be matured in new charred oak, which is good for the Scottish industry, because they can't use their barrels again, so they sell them to us relatively cheaply. But what that means is it imparts some really strong oaky tannic elements to it, which I love. Bags of vanilla, loads more of those spicy elements. It's not overly complex, but it doesn't have to be. You know, it is what it is. I kind of mentioned earlier about the ABV being 43 being a bit of a shame, and that really is just a kind of like something I need to unlearn, because the flavour in this is just fine. It's got a really nice zing to it on the other end. Really tasty. The finish is like medium, I would say. It's not overly long. In comparison to some scotches, it's probably a little bit longer, but in the bourbon arena, I would call this medium. Very spice-led. Not particularly fruity. Quite drying on the back end, but that's something that always leads me to have another dram of it. As a kind of summary then, for me, as I mentioned earlier, the bottle is going down very nicely, so I couldn't say anything other than I'm enjoying this bottle. Would I replace it? Not sure, because obviously I make whiskey reviews for a pastime, and I tend to buy new bottles that I haven't tried before to bring you guys fresh content. That said, if it comes up on an Amazon deal, like I've seen this on previously for 25 quid, it seems to be a bit of a no-brainer. That's very cheap, and I can't imagine there's many people making good money off of a bottle like that. But yeah, even for a normal price, for a one-off for sure, I think it's not as good as the rare breed, but I wouldn't expect it to be. A rare breed is a lot more. The 101 is probably, for my money, a little bit more interesting. Higher ABV. Obviously, the 101 is the proof, so it's half that for ABV. So for me, it's a little bit more interesting for the cash. It's about 25 quid again. But yeah, definitely something interesting to try if you're into your bourbons, or if you've liked Wild Turkeys, you've had your eye on this for a little bit. Probably time to pull the trigger on it.